We met the other day. I got to go through the product. I was impressed by the product. I see and I call a lot of bullshit in my day. And I was going, this is an impressive build. This has been well thought through. This will be hard. I see defensible. It kind of brought up a few different kind of questions throughout the day. I've been thinking a lot about this just because the day and age in which we live in. You're a people person, right? You've got background at Singularity University, chief people officer is peppered in there regularly. I mean, in many ways, you're kind of assessing and trying to figure out how to put the right butt in the right seat on the bus is largely as I interpreted a lot of this. Like, this is a data-driven methodology to understand who's on the bus and how to get them into the right seat if they aren't there yet. Where does that come from? What passion, what are you born with that really kind of drives that? All right, I can assess people. I can assess their value. I can assess potentially how to get them on the right track if they're off. Where does that start in your life?
I mean, I'll take you back to the very beginning. And if you look at my background, if you look at my, something you can't see, and I don't think we talked about when we first met, I was a police officer with the city of Los Angeles. That's how I started. And one thing that became pronounced, I mean, like, there were so many lessons that came out of that period of my life. But one of them was that you could have four people standing on four corners of the exact same intersection and watch the exact same accident and have four completely different perspectives on what happened and why it happened. And I think when I left the PD and I went into business, that lesson kind of stuck with me, because perception is what really shapes reality. And perception is 100% about people. You don't have perception in a spreadsheet. It's really binary. It's like the number is there, it's not, the column sums, it doesn't. But people are just more complicated than that. And so I think the love or passion that I had for the space, and I mean, I've been in C-level HR roles for 20 years, and I've been in the profession for about 25, but it's always driven by this notion that people are just really complicated. And there's two sides of the coin, I think, for what drives me. One is I want to help people bring their best, because that just makes the world a better place. When people contribute and they are recognized for that contribution and they feel good about it, there's gold for everybody in life. And there is a means to an end to that too, for business, right? People don't get paid if businesses don't succeed. And we have this evil, like, sort of empire perception of some businesses. But the reality is that the success of the business is important for every single one of the people in it. And so I wanted to leverage the talents of people and bring them to bear so that the business could succeed. And I think that takes a different mindset than most HR people have. And I'm happy to riff on that. I've become critical of the profession over 25 years.
Riff. I mean, we're at a moment. One of the thoughts that came up to me was just like, I don't know that people have simultaneously mattered more and less than they do right now from a business perspective. Like, meaning treating them like an individual from the customer side seems to be of paramount importance, more than it's ever been before. You can't ignore the individual more than you ever have been able to before. And then simultaneously, I'm watching so many people that are finding ways to just rush people out the door if they get one little automation figured out. Or it's just like, oh yeah, there must be nothing else they can contribute. And I just go, there's this weird bifurcation right now. You watch layoffs in the news, and then you watch like, oh yeah, look how awesome we can personalize your experience. Where I just go, man, this is like the widest spectrum of that, like, kind of human appreciation that I don't know that I've ever seen before.
So I totally, like, I want to come back and I want to talk about the HR thing, but you've really touched on something that I think is important. And I call bullshit on that whole thing. Less than 5% of the total layoffs that have happened have been directly relatable to artificial intelligence. It gets the blame. But what's going on is shareholders are demanding the right size businesses and impact to bottom line. And there was a period that was right after COVID where we held on to a lot of expense that we shouldn't have, and we added a lot of expense that potentially we shouldn't have as well. And we're now laying that expense off, and we're taking the easy route and blaming AI for it. But a lot of it is just right sizing for boards and shareholders. And so I just think that the narrative is BS. Now, are there companies that are laying off? Look at what Block is doing, right?
Sure.
40% of the workforce.
40%
That's a
layoff,
company
right?
when they're doing it, but that's not the average company. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think we have to be careful before we make the assumption. I want to give you an example though, and I think it goes directly to this and to the fear. I mean, I got associated with Peter Diamandis at Singularity University, and I am such a Peter fan. And his concept of abundance, the ideas he has about the future, they are right. And what we have to do is keep things in perspective. And here's the perspective I use. If we go all the way back to 1978, there was a huge technological shift that happened, and it rocked the world. And I, like, embarrassingly, was alive in 1978, or as the kids I think today call it, the late 1900s. But the tech shift was the calculator, and the price point had dropped to where it was consumable on a mass scale, and like the big worry was that accountants are going to disappear. And I've got a photo of it someplace, and I saw it on LinkedIn recently. A newspaper front page with university professors that were protesting the use of the calculator in the classroom because it was going to completely erode all math skills and people were just going to be dumb. And none of that happened. Now, fast forward, 1983, Lotus releases 123, which is the precursor to all spreadsheet programs. And the world goes back crazy again, because financial professionals are going to be out of work and there's going to be mass unemployment, and none of it happened. But what did happen was we stopped framing the financial world in terms of the terms that we understood, and we had to frame it in new terms. And it's exactly what's happening today. We're trying to take artificial intelligence and what's happening with jobs and the future of work and where people are going to fit in, and we're trying to put it in the context that we understand, which is normal, it's human. But it's not going to fit into the context we know. We're going to have to invent a new context. And in the case of the financial accountants, what they had to do is, or the financial professionals, they had to release the way that they had delivered value previously, which was through calculation. Because now the tech was doing that calculation better and faster, and in some cases more autonomously than the humans could do it, and more accurately. What they had to do was embrace a new way of delivering value, and that was through analysis and strategy. And the world actually benefited from that. And employment went up for finance professionals and not down, because they could do more. And so when these tools come along and we get negative about it because we start to see things that don't fit into our present context, I think we've got to pull back and recognize that we are defining a new context that we don't yet understand, and that these tools have always made the world better. Sometimes the transition's a little wonky, but the world on the whole has always bent toward a more positive future. And I don't think anything is going to happen differently here.
So like you run an AI company and you've got to make bets every week on, I mean, if it's like me, refreshing kind of product and features pretty regularly as well. When you're looking through that technology right now, do you have a barometer for like what's real, what's fake, what's worth investing in, what's worth skipping? Do you have kind of a guideline? I mean, because there is so much tumultuousness. I was looking at stuff today. You've heard of Claude-bot, Molt-bot type stuff. Was watching someone who did an analysis on it. Just a heads up, that huge, for those that haven't heard it, this is an automated AI agent that can basically run independently 24/7. And there's evidence that one of the first things they did once they launched it was put it on its own social virality campaign, and it went and faked a bunch of its own hype. And it is not nearly as successful and everything else, but it looked like it was the best thing since sliced bread 4 weeks ago. It's already going, oh, by the way, most of that was bots. Its own bots, for that matter. They made a widget that made agents, and that agent made its own agents who went and hyped it to increase its likelihood of success. When you're looking at it right now, especially as it relates to those people, I work on that too. I have to go through a lot of it too, right? Personalized email recommendations or other things. How do you pick out what to focus on, what you adopt, and what you kind of leave on the shelf from that perspective?
Well, I mean, so I think if you establish a set of principles, it helps. I want to caveat this. I'm a first-time founder, and one thing that I've recognized in the founder journey is I used to think that I knew a lot about a lot, and as it turns out, I know close to nothing about almost everything. And so my desire to give other people advice has to be massively asterisked with this guy potentially doesn't know what he's talking about because he is a first-time founder and kind of finding his own way through all of this. I also think it's important, language matters. And this is another reason, back to your starting question. why the HR path. Language matters, and people use language, and machines use language a lot more precisely, but people use language very imprecisely, and I think we have to be careful of that because it creates context and fear in some cases and hype in other cases, and both of those things are bad. So when we say AI, I think you got to be careful. Like saying AI is like saying transportation. You know, you've got rockets and planes.
It's an umbrella. It's an umbrella for a lot of other things.
Right. So I think we have to be more precise with the language. And if you have totally unmitigated, free agents that don't have contextual boundaries around them, I think those can be problematic for the reasons that we've seen, including there was the OpenClaw example. I think is the one you were referring to. Not only did it create its own social media post, but it actually conducted a campaign against a developer who had some comments on its code, and it went out and it ran a social media campaign, like an influence campaign against this developer. So but that's not, that's one use of one type of artificial intelligence technology. And so I think we have to be careful with the language. The way we think about it is, from a philosophical perspective at Propulsion AI, we are building systems that help make humans better. And so they are not completely autonomous without the appropriate guardrails in them. And we're also not building tech that is replacing people. We are building tech that is going to allow those people to shed pieces of their job that are either extremely hard for humans to do or extremely, sort of not palatable or the ones that don't taste good. And with that capacity, the humans can go off and do some things that they couldn't do before. And we're an example of that as a company. But I think, what I think about is, how do we put in guardrails, principles, context, structure that lets the tech work with us and augment us so the humans become better, rather than thinking about how can we just replace the humans so that we don't need them? I think that's going to be a boring workplace, although I have a lot of really interesting, and I'm totally speech to text in both directions. So when I interact with the large language models, I'm having a conversation, and I stand in the office all day at this desk, standing up and talk to the AI, but literally talk to it.
Sure. I do appreciate that as well. One of those where it's so much faster to converse. One of those where I'm like, I don't know if my kid's going to know what a keyboard looked like. They're teaching him cursive right now. I'm just like, why?
Well, you've seen the videos. It's like TikTok videos of kids with old school phones, like the push button phones, and they're like, "Where's send?"
Yeah.
There's going to be some keyboard equivalent of that at some point in the future.
So when you're using that AI tech and you're using the prospect of language, because one of the fundamental, I think, really big challenges is you kind of hit on it, right? First time I went to China, I was kind of surprised because they seem to have a different interpretation for the word love. Because I remember talking to one of the ladies that was like a tour guide type of thing for us. Or she was our handler, walking us around. And she was just telling us about her life. And I found out that her and her husband lived literally on opposite ends of the country. Literally thousands of miles apart. And it was like, oh, is that weird? And she's like, no, it was one of these where it was just, there's a different concept, and kind of opened up the premise of words have different meaning, even between people that live and grew up in the same town. At least with this lady, it was a little bit more of an economic situation where there was a fit there, but it wasn't necessarily about proximity and that type of thing, at least for her. And when you talk about language, same thing. I've done a little bit of analysis on data sets, including job title. I remember seeing there were 10,000 different jobs and 85 different job titles in that data set, meaning I kind of went, I don't know that many people were really doing that many different jobs amongst that data set, but they sure as hell seem to describe them that way. And when you're trying to do it, which I believe your task to some extent is, identify the person, identify the role, the human agnostic version of it, the fit, and try to put the right person into that seat, at least understanding what are they may describe it differently, but are they capable of doing the thing that you need? And simultaneously for them, are they capable of doing the thing that they are potentially capable of becoming, I guess you would say, right? Yeah. You're not necessarily raising the employee, you're raising the person or whatever that they can eventually become. What's the hardest part about that with those data sets and and tools that you have at your disposal right now?
Well, so to contextualize for people who are listening who don't know what Propulsion AI does or where we are,
Sure.
we have a series of what we call artificial intelligence teammates. AI that is working alongside human counterparts and directly with managers within the business. Our principal focus is private equity. We help private equity operating partners turn value creation plans into actual bottom line, which is, according to KPMG, 65% of PE firms say that is their biggest challenge, is taking what they originally thought was going to be the value, the ability to create value when they purchase the business and turn it within their hold period into actual EBITDA. So that's our focus. Those teammates, though, not only provide workforce diligence that is as rigorous as the PE's financial diligence, but they do some of the things you've started to allude to. We have a teammate that cascades strategy. Shockingly, like if you ask, like 68% of employees cannot tell you what their company's strategy is. And it's not because there weren't enough town halls. It was because nobody took the last step and took the OKR cascade. OKR is objective and key result, right? And we do these cascades from level to level. And we get down to the team level and we're like, okay, that's it. That's the team goals. And nobody ever converts it into role level details. But you think about it, OKRs are not strategy. OKRs are architecture. And your ability to hit your targets and my ability to hit mine and her ability to hit hers and his ability to hit his, the sum total of that, that's strategy achievement. When we are all hitting the targets that are then interconnected up that chain, that's where strategy gets achieved. We have a teammate that focuses on that. And what you were alluding to is our talent optimization suite. We have 4 teammates that think about how do we find and place better people into roles? How do we help those people take those target results and build work plans around them? And then how do we give them meaningful feedback? We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars every year on learning and development. And I honestly think most of it is just complete nonsense. I think if we focused on 2 factors, we would get so much farther ahead. One is, do you understand what's expected of you at work? And the second is, do you get enough feedback about your actual performance to manage yourself and become better and grow? And if we just focused on those 2 things and teaching managers how to do those 2 things, throw the rest of it away as far as I'm concerned.
Damn.
And we're building teammates that help that process. But the biggest obstacle is the humans.
Agree. Simultaneously, the enablers and the obstacles, right?
But I want to do it without them. Like it would be super boring if we didn't have that. So
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, and you always hear the old adage that like people join a company and quit because of a boss kind of thing too, right? Like again, it's the clash of amongst those expectations, even on the one-to-one level that is so common. It's like, I needed this, you don't do that, and or you don't like the incentive structure or whatever that we've built to do it. And it is one of, I mean, if I had a nickel for every company that was created because someone hated their boss, all the damn nickels.
Just not that complicated. But Gallup tells us 47% of employees can tell you what their boss expects of them. The other 53% can't. And that's really tragic. And nobody leaves because of money until money gets unfair. Money is so far down that list of what drives loyalty. What really drives loyalty is, do I know what you want from me? Do I understand how you're going to measure me? And are you doing it fairly? And then do you give me feedback that helps me to actually grow? That is not like, it's not simple to do, but it is not so hard that it can't be done. You just have to start by believing people want to come to work. I'm a theory Y guy. People want to come to work. They want to do good work. And then we get in their way. And if we can just get ourselves out of their way, they're going to do really good things for us.
What's Theory X, Theory Y?
Theory X, Theory Y was this very industrial revolution. And Theory X said people need to be controlled. They need rules. You have to give them very prescriptive things to do because they don't have intrinsic motivation. Theory Y said what I just said. People are basically, they want to do a great job. They are going to go the extra mile until you start getting in their way with stuff. And then that's where it gets complicated. I'm a theory.
What about incentive alignment? I've always thought that was the most difficult part. It wasn't necessarily defining the expectations. It was aligning the incentives to get them done. That was always mine, because this is kind of getting into those motivations. Because in my experience, and I'm probably wrong, I'm not good at this at all. Because I would often say I'm a theory Y guy that routinely falls back to theory X because Y doesn't seem to ever get me what I want. Where I always go like, hey, here's the carrot. I can go, here's the best way to get what you want. It's the easiest, the least friction. And then simultaneously, every time I've had multiple times where you had people that were like, hey, look, just get off my back. I can handle this. So I just go, okay, cool. Here's the deliverable. You have 3 months to get it. Here's exactly what I'm looking for in 3 months. We'll put a calendar invite on the calendar and then we show up in 3 months and you get not exactly, but something close to where's what deliverable. And I go, okay. From that perspective, I'm the victim of going, my human experience is theory X is at least, it's maybe not 50-50, but it's probably 60-40. Theory Y, 60, and then 40 for theory X. But
so, I mean, like, people need guidance for sure. And I want to, I'm now going to criticize what you just told me, but for everybody and for clarity between the two of us, you have done so much more in business than I have. You have scaled companies to the level I'm dreaming of scaling them to. So you're doing something right? And just to, fair is fair acknowledgement. Here's one of the things key to our philosophy of Propulsion AI is that if we think in terms of activities, it's very hard to get people to do what is ultimately going to be good for the business and good for them. If we shift that thinking from activity-based to outcomes-based, it gets a lot easier, but you can't let it run on autopilot. What I mean by the shift from activity to outcome, a simple example, if we're talking about an accountant and we look at that accountant's job description, we would probably see something in it that says follow up on delinquent accounts, because that's how most job descriptions are written. They're activity-based and they read like obituaries. And we kind of get performance around that. And there was another guy whose name I'm forgetting who called that choiceless doers. And right. And so, and that's what activity focus gets you. But listen to this. The reason we care about follow up on delinquent accounts is it is a means to an end. And in the accountant's sense, the end is reducing what's called days sales outstanding, DSO. It's a measure of how fast the organization can collect money. And in a $10 million company, for the simplicity of the math, if you can bring DSO down from 90 days to 60 days, you create $833,000 of cash acceleration. But if that accountant sits at the desk and makes all of the calls that you tell them to and doesn't move the number, the value created is zero. So the first step in the process is shift from the activity to the outcome. And what we do at Propulsion, and the way that one of our teammates, our first teammate is named Athena, her specialty is coaching managers in this process, moving from activity focused to outcomes focused. And then she writes all of the collateral: performance-based job description, SEO optimized posting for the web, spec for the recruiter, etc. And in that process, she is going to marry three things together: an outcome, a KPI, and a target result. And we think that's a part of the success formula. Here's the outcome that you have to get to. Here's how I'm going to measure your success. And this is specifically the number I need you to bring down. Now, what that sets up is not just clarity for the individual. So now back to that Gallup stat, 53% of people come to work and they don't know what's expected. The way that Athena does this leaves the manager and the employee hyper clear about what the manager wants and expects. And that delivers confidence and allows autonomy, but it also allows initiative. Because now what you want is for the employee to come back and say, wait, if that outcome is my job, shouldn't I do these things? And the manager's like, yes, like do that, right? Like I hadn't even seen that, do that, right? So now you've got an initiative taking employee and you got a manager who feels good. But it also sets up a conversation in a one-on-one. We have another teammate that works directly with the employee to build a work plan. So if I have to bring down DSO from 90 to 60 over 12 months, what's my plan? What am I going to do in the first 13 weeks? What am I going to do in the second 13 weeks? And when I sit down with you for my one-on-one, one of the first things you should say is, how are you doing to the numbers? Where's the number today? Where was it last week? What are you doing? What have you tried? What have you not tried? What are you going to try? Like, if the number isn't moving, we should be having that conversation and weekly conversations about where that number isn't moving. Now, maybe it's planned non-movement. We don't expect it to move for a month. Fine. But what we shouldn't do is hockey stick it, and that was my criticism. Right? You don't get to them at the end of the 3 months and go, where's the deliverable? You get to them in weekly meetings where you go, how you doing? Is the number moving, right? Now, we think the other things that go into a good one-on-one are, how are you showing up to the numbers? How are you showing up in the workplace vis-a-vis competencies? We said these ones are the ones you're going to work on. Like, here's what I'm hearing from other people. Here's what I'm seeing myself. What are you seeing? Let's talk about your skill development. We said we're going to focus on these two. Tell me where, you're feeling good and where you're not. Let's talk about experiences we can get you. What else can I do for you? Those 4 things. That's a really good one-on-one. Now we have another teammate. We haven't built her yet. Her name is Minerva. But what she will do is sit in on that conversation, capture it, but she will also help us think through our interaction. And so that's how I move as an employee toward meaningful achievement, how you get what you want without micromanaging me, and how we set up the constraints so that I can have a job with meaning and purpose, and you can have an employee that takes initiative and ownership.
So it sounds like there's a lot of proxies. And for what it's worth, just so you know, when I was doing those talk to you in 3 months, it was usually after the week-to-week meetings were like, these are too many meetings. This is too much oversight. Just let me do my thing, man. And I went, all right, I'm more than happy to get out of the way, but it's at this price, right? Like 3 months from now, you're going to show up and you're going to prove that you can manage yourself. I find there's just a ton of people out there. I think there is to some extent, including me, everyone. But everyone works better with a little bit of oversight over their shoulder. Like everybody's got a boss, and that's not a bad thing, right?
No.
But for what it's worth, I didn't do just make it magic. It was like one of those where they were like, let me do my thing. I know how to do this. All right, good. The less I have to do, the better.
My own asterisk on myself. You have built and scaled businesses that I am aspiring to build.
No. You're fine. You clearly, though, from the big thing is agents right now. We went from chatbots to feature and prompt engineer being the number one job on LinkedIn. People are now talking about launching and deploying agentic architectures and all that fun stuff. You've clearly got, because I imagine most of the principles that you just mentioned are also probably how you're programming and developing Minerva and Athena, correct? Like, what is the outcome, right?
Yeah, there are agentic components, but there are also structured logic components. There are also large language model components. There are also relational components, and there are also components that require the human.
Yeah. There's a lot of those that are kind of coming out now. And there's a lot of those, like, I don't know if you've seen there was MIT study from a little while ago that said like 95% of AI companies can't point to their ROI. And I think this was one of the big critiques of it. Not what you're doing, but just generally speaking, they didn't have defined deliverables. They didn't have KPIs. They didn't actually even measure the benchmark from where they started. So there was no way to really look back and figure out how effective they were. Like, from your opinion, when you're developing kind of these roles, what really kind of sets aside? Is it a repeat of the same things that we would tell a human? Like, if you're establishing those agents, you're programming those logical pieces, the LLM, the underlying components, what do they look like from a principle standpoint? Like, what do the guardrails and guidelines look like?
So I want to answer that question directly, and I want to quickly come over to that MIT study, because there's an aspect of it it's critically important, and it's one that we also try and handle.
Sure.
We don't use like generic, prompts that are these big, hallucination prone prompts with large language models. Like, I want you to take on the role of fill in the blank, right?
Yeah.
That's like the prompting equivalent of where do you see yourself in 5 years? I have about
You're asking for it, right?
Right. But like, I think our longest prompt that we use in the system is 32 pages if you put it into a Word document. Wow. They are highly structured, highly rules-based. It's why our system doesn't hallucinate. And it's also where we put in guide rails, because when I started the company, we went out and interviewed, like, I think the number was like 127 or 128, professionals, talent professionals, heads of HR, really successful HRBPs. We were looking for org psych people, consultants. We were looking for what their frameworks were. We were looking for themes across the frameworks. We took those frameworks and we built AI into them. And so there are very prescribed ways of getting to answers. And, organizational development people and org psych people and, HR business partners, they use these methods with humans. We just found a way to do it that scales and democratizes the experience. But that's basically what we've done is we took the framework that we knew worked and we found a way to do it at scale using artificial intelligence. It still involves human interaction. Let me tell you though about when you deploy in this MIT study, and I think we're talking about the same one. One of the reasons for such high failure rate was that they were deploying AI without rethinking the work. And what makes artificial intelligence, I just wrote an article about this that I'm shopping to Forbes and Fortune. And I'm hoping maybe you have people that listen that are on the editorial board. It would be nice. But the premise that I took in the article is that deploying AI is not like a tech deployment. And I think Salesforce actually pioneered this, because what they did, Salesforce's model was they went straight to the people that used the tech, and they thought about how to shift the work of those people with the tech. And I think that's actually a really good model. When you deploy AI, the reason that AI is such a different technology than anything we've seen before is that previous tech has, for the most part, just made the existing process faster. But AI forces a fundamental redistribution of work between people and machines. And so when you do that, you have to rethink the human work. And what's happened is companies are trying to slap AI on because they're afraid of falling behind, rather than completely rethinking their business around the concept of AI, which naturally means what's going to be done by human-in-the-loop systems, what's going to be done by agentic systems, what's going to be done by humans exclusively, and how do you design the work specifically for those three? We have job descriptions for each one of our teammates, because we think it's important that it's clear what their role is and how they contribute to the organization. And we wrote them, right? Like Athena wrote the job descriptions for all of the teammates. So she used the same style, that it's outcome based. And we incorporate that into their constitution. So they understand, the teammate understands what their role is. But to do that, we had to think of what was the role of the human going to be in this process? What's the role of the system? Now, what we're building right now, what we've built so far is human-in-the-loop systems. What we are building is a mix of human-in-the-loop and agentic. But everything has a purpose, and you have to define the work, and you especially have to define it for the human.
What does work look like as a result? I'm going through one of those inflection points in my own life where it's like hitting me personally right now, where I'm going, this is almost just 2 weeks ago, but I'm just like, I was already used to working in AI, but I did get to the point where I just kind of came to the conclusion, like, the tools out there are good enough that I could replace myself. And I don't necessarily mean that I go away, but I do mean the former version of myself, if I don't change, is got a shelf life. It does have a shelf life, right? Like, let's face it, a ton of, like, to rephrase some of those studies we've seen before, like the block analysis with the 40% of that, I think potentially that's short-sighted, because it's saying, in reality, probably about 40% of someone's work per day is out the door. That doesn't necessarily mean that they can't fill the rest of their day with a new 40%. And I think that's where a lot of the short-sightedness is coming from, because oftentimes the drudgery hoards that 40%. And now you go, okay, cool. It's going to take you less than a month to get rid of that 40%. You just freed up all that time with your schedule. What do you want to do with that capacity? And here's the reality. The rising tide is going to raise all boats. So there's going to be that disruption. There's going to be layoffs. People are going to do that. And then all of a sudden they're going to realize, well, everybody else who didn't lay people off, they just sped the hell up. They created that 40% capacity, and now they're working on new features instead of bugs. And now they're doing and making extra calls or whatever else. So now we have to rehire those people, retrain them and or whatever, but get them into the mindset of, okay, what does your new work look like when you're delegating, decisioning, curating, editing, but no longer actually executing the drudgery yourself? You're almost getting paid for your judgment, your taste, and your creativity at that point.
But those are the exact things that artificial intelligence technology does not do well, that humans do way better. And, large data set ingestion and analysis, and writing to a certain extent, and some coding to a certain extent. And like those things are things that AI is doing way better than humans. But there are a bunch of things that it doesn't do very well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, wholeheartedly agree. Again, I think it's one of those, like, the nature, to your point, the nature of that work is changing, which also means, though, to some extent, people aren't safe. Like, I go from the worker standpoint, and I go, if you think you'll be able to do, you hear shadow AI, people are using AI and not telling their company, their boss or whatever. I just go, heads up, it's going to take them a week to notice. Like, they're either going to notice that you're ridiculously productive at a very, very tiny increment of the actual day. And they're also going to notice that all of your peers are accelerating a hell of a lot faster. So, like, good, you're going to get a little bit of a break. But if you think that 40% isn't going to show up in the numbers, it's going to show up pretty damn quickly. You're going to be below average very, very noticeably, very, very fast. If you just go, yeah, I just don't have to work 40% of my day anymore. It's like, not really, probably not.
I think you're right in what you've said. But I think, at least for me, the way I choose to look at that is there's going to be a bunch of people who are doing what you just said and getting that 40%. They are going to choose to recommit that 40% to something else. And they are going to start inventing and, or riffing on whatever other kind of work needs to get done. And, or they're going to go deeper. And I'll use an example. I write a lot, and I actually think I spend more time writing because I have tools available to me that make the writing faster. So I'll give you an example. So I use two tools when I write. One is Perplexity. I use it for research, and the other is Claude, and I use it to actually do the writing. And so I will say to Claude, here's a series of articles that I have found really interesting, and I want you to think about the themes that come out of these articles. Then I will take those themes and I will give it to Perplexity with a prompt that says, go and look for all of the articles that have written that involve these themes, and I want you to find me the aspects that nobody's talking about. And then Perplexity comes back with that, and I give that back to Claude, and I say, okay, I want you to take this point of view as you help me write this article. And so Claude will write a draft, and I'll say, this is all the things that are wrong with that. Then I'll take this thing and I'll realize, wait, there's something missing for that. And I'll go back over to Perplexity and I'll say, go and research and find me articles that refute or support this hypothesis. And it'll come back with output. And I'll read that and ingest it. And then I'll give it back over to Claude and say, the research seems to be saying this is supporting it. Let's write on this angle. Now, the total time to generate an article is a lot faster, but I think I actually think deeper, and I think I'm working harder to get the work product, and I actually think it's a better work product because I'm using those tools. And I think that's what smart people are going to start doing in the workplace with the tech that's available. I hope that's what they do.
I think I'm a little bit of a pessimist. So just to rephrase it, I just don't know that they'll have the choice. So I'm not going to say that some won't, some will. I just go, I think the ones that choose not to will find the harsh reality that someone's going to make that decision for them, because the reality is it's going to be a speed bump where, like, I don't know if you know this, there's subreddits right now where people actually join communities that help them understand how to maintain and fake multiple full-time jobs. Right. And you go so they're going, job one caught me on LinkedIn doing this or whatever else. And you're just going, there's a whole community of this where I just go, just heads up, like the rest of the population is going to adapt. They'll adapt relatively quickly. I think like COVID kind of caused a shift to significant online behavior that got people ready for ChatGPT, and people are already kind of going, okay, I know how keyboards work. I can figure this out. Right. So I do think it's one of those, again, I can tell you, like, even months or two ago, I just went, I don't know what people are going to do. But I think that was my naivete for sure, because I was going, like, there was a time in my life where I thought, like, oh, it would be cool to buy an island. And then I went on a mini retirement and actually did a trip around the world and was bored to shit in 2 months, where I was like, I'm done. This sucks. I am not built for this. I probably will never retire in my life. It is not what I thought it was cracked up to be at all. I think it was more one of those where it's just like, yeah, like, I think it was, one of the founders of Google, someone was like, why didn't you just go buy an island? And he just went, well, then what? It's like, yeah, I don't know that that's it. That is for everybody. It's like, definitely not for me. At least not now. So in the good news to write, like, the washing machine showed up and everyone went, oh no, we'll never find any jobs. It's like, no, we'll just find and create new jobs. The advancement is different. The workday is different. And it's a lot more interesting. It's a lot funner. It is much more creative, and it is much more burning calories brain-wise, as far as like, no, I'm not doing that process. I have to think about what's next a lot. And that is a lot of, you burn a lot of calories having to figure out what haven't I thought of. So I'm having a lot of,
there's a book for people who are just sort of entering into, like, what can AI do and what can I do with it? There's a really interesting book called The AI-Driven Leader that I think people should read. And it's by a guy named Jeff Woods, who came out of the GH Smart company.
Who do you follow for those? Where do you get kind of your principles for a lot of these? I mean, I found out that, like, when we were building things, I would go to try to kind of, you want to build kind of an efficient decisioning layer. right? If everything is prompted in LLMs, there's a lot of faults with that, just not knowing what you don't know. And a lot of the stuff that you're impressed with is oftentimes means that you're below average on it, just because oftentimes when you look at your own expertise in those things, you're unimpressed, right? Or at least like, that's written well, but the logic behind it's not that great. And you kind of have to stack those. I presume based on your power wall behind you, you're a big reader.
Books. It's interesting because they say if you have a lot of, like, smart people have a lot of books in your house. So I tried to be smart and just put a lot of books in my house, but it didn't work. I'm still a part of the class that made the top half possible.
I just keep, as I drop my pile of stuff, I just keep my Kindle next to me.
There you go.
There's my daily. What are the ones you revisit? I'm one of those people that doesn't like doing the same thing twice. I don't like traveling to the same location twice. I don't like watching the same movie twice and stuff like that. What are the ones that you find that you could revisit over and over and over?
Well, so, I mean, I think I have to revisit them because I'm not smart enough to get the whole message on the way in. And I'll tell you one of them, which is, I'm going to grab the book. If I can find it on demand, it's right here. So Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky at Harvard, I actually did a program with them, and they wrote this book called Leadership on the Line. And it's about adaptive leadership. And here's like the seminal example that they use in the beginning of the book that they did in their program that makes it come alive for me. Congestive heart failure, which is, I know, not where you thought I was going to go with this, right? Like if you have 7 out of 8 people who have congestive heart failure are going to die. Because what they're looking for is a technical fix. Give me an operation, give me a pill. But what they need is an adaptive solution. You have to, if you're going to get past congestive heart failure, you have to change your life. You have to quit smoking, you have to exercise, you have to change your diet, right? And 7 out of 8 people don't want to do that. They just want a technical fix. So leadership on the line is really about adaptive leadership. How do you, as a leader, and they use that term as a verb, not a noun. And I have never been able to get past that. When people use that, I have an allergic reaction when people use leader as a title, because leadership is a verb. You can only see it when it is being exercised. And I learned that with Marty and Ron, and I believe that, right? Which means that it doesn't have anything to do with organizational hierarchy, doesn't have anything to do with your title. It has what it has to do with is your ability to influence a system, to frustrate, as Ron and Marty say, to frustrate the system at a rate that it can accept in the service of something that is better for the people that are involved. And I did the program with them in 2007, which shockingly is coming up on like 20 years. And I'm still learning things about life and about being a leader. And the other book that I think is really interesting is called Influencer, and it's by Carrie Patterson.
So when you implement these, obviously the frameworks, because you've mentioned some of the stuff that kind of hints at these theory X, theory Y and stuff. Well, so I always come across these, and I've had a couple. Have you ever tried to implement these into the platform? But also oftentimes finding when it comes to data-driven analysis, you find out a lot of them are great ideas that don't work like math does.
I don't know. I'm yet to find that. I think what you have to do is you have to find the right way to apply the concept. I think the concepts are solid. I'm a big fan and always have been of Lou Adler. In fact, Lou just came on my podcast, the Talent Sherpa podcast. I'm a co-host with my co-host Jackson Lynch, and it's just like Lou's like, I don't know, he's like 157 years old, and the guy looks 70, and he's amazing. He has been the voice on how to get the right people hired for 50 years. And we built a lot of his principles into the talent optimization suite of partners that we're building. But you can't just take an idea and just go with it. You have to find the right application of the idea.
For sure. That stuff's always fun. You find out because I would largely go, well, what does our empirical data say? Then try to build it's like building a science experiment, right? You go, we got a hypothesis. There's a book. I built one off Chip Conley's stuff for Peak, which was based off Maslow's hierarchy in the workplace, where he's just like, all right, you go through air, food, water, whatever. You keep going up and you get into metaphysical stuff, and you get from cash to career to a calling, right? So the same premise, they act differently. And once you get to one level, you aspire and you thrive to get to the next one, right? So as soon as you know you've got a steady paycheck, all of a sudden your social cloud of your title starts to matter, because there is actually a future here. Once you got a future here and your finances and all that stuff are taken care of long term, you've got the retirement account, all of a sudden you start wondering, well, what's my legacy start to look like? And that's how people kind of evolve. So if you can use that as an incentive system, because you're going, if people don't have the stability of the workplace, they're not going to be focused on their career with you. They're still worried about surviving through the weekend. So no, they're not going to try to focus on some higher power being or whatever else, just because you haven't created an incentive system. And like, generally speaking, it works, but then also at the same time, you find out there's a bunch of cases where you're like, well, what do I do with this other stuff? I like that premise, just Maslow's hierarchy, the premise of like, well, until you fix this, you can't get to that. Right. So, he was dealing with running a hotelier, and, he's like, how do you get people to care about what people could aspire to by staying here if your job is cleaning toilets, right? Like, how do you instill that side of someone's kind of intelligence and kind of getting part of their consciousness to focus on that for your guests? And it's like, well, the reality is, you have to basically fulfill their lower incentives and motivations before you can get them to think about those. And that's your alignment structures. How do you get all of that working together for you?
I'm insanely curious how you built that. What did you do with that in the product that you were building?
I took human capital surveys, just because I mean, at the same time, like you, I was dealing with a situation where I was unhappy with my job. I do innovation strategy. I like building stuff. And I was working on a team of innovation strategists who, a lot of them didn't like building stuff. They were protecting their jobs. And from my perspective, if I'm working on something, I will happily lose my job if I'm wrong, right? Like, I will take a bet, and if my product sucks, fire me. But I want the risk and I want the reward if it does work. But yeah, fire me if it doesn't work. I'm not afraid of that. And I never have been. Like, people will go like, I'm an entrepreneur. And I go, I'm sorry. Cause they say it like it's a badge of honor. I think it's a mental illness. It's just like, no, I do it cause I can't help it. It's not because I aspire to it. I'm really bad at anything else, and I get wrapped up into it. I like my work in that sense. And I use that, and I was dissatisfied with my job, and I was working for people, in their defense, were very good at having a good long career. And I went, well, I've got a trajectory where I'm good at fits and starts. I've done some work that's like award worthy, awesome. But then simultaneously, I'll step on toes to do it, because I'll step on toes of people who are like career focused, where I'm going, my career gets made if I launch that product and it becomes $1 billion product. I don't have to worry about my career if I do that. And I'm capable of it, and I won't hit every at bat. I only need to hit one in my life, and I will hit that one in my life. So I started looking for other ways to, like, how do you get satisfaction? The weird thing too is a cushy job. I made a bunch of money, had access to the company jet and stuff like that, right? It was a cushy job, and I was going, I'm depressed. How do I get out of this? So I was looking for other incentives and stuff to get my own brain kind of into it, and came across Chip Conley, which I do think it is one of those. He was like one of the earlier TED Talks that really kind of went viral. And that was his premise, like, use Maslow's hierarchy and apply it to your company, go to your customers, your employees, and see if you can set up that incentive structure where you meet their needs for each level of that pyramid and then move them up to the top. So I took and did a lot of consumer insights research, figured out how to build a survey, started building the logic of like, what are the need states at each levels of each pyramid? A job would be, all right, I have a steady paycheck, and a career would be like, I have a 401k. So you could actually start to align those, and built Likert scales, put it in a survey, and then started building the logic using Excel to go, okay, cool. I'll go measure all of these different dimensions of someone's working relationship with their employer. Theory X, Theory Y was in it, by the way. And then the idea was, you'd take a survey, hand it to the employer, and go, well, here's where most of your employees are. Here's where you think they are. Here's where the average company is. And by the way, these surveys kind of act like a roadmap, because they're Maslow based. Until you fix the bottom rung, you can't do anything on the next one. So it very easily kind of lays out a chronological map of how to proceed. And again, a lot of stuff, generally speaking, I think it did work, but you still had a bunch of stuff where you're just like, wait a minute, this person, like as an example, you found in charitable organizations, you had a bunch of people that believed in the vision, but simultaneously didn't have a steady paycheck. So you had like these weird contradictions and outliers and stuff where you're just like, well, what do I do in this situation? And then you have all the fun stuff of, all right, well, the literature doesn't speak to this part. What do I do here now? So it gave a good framework. I love that. But it also just meant that you have to come up with all of those outlier situations and how do you work through those? Same thing with, we built our personality model on like the 5 different dimensions for Big 5, and you hear about people doing DISC profiles and Myers-Briggs and same kind of thing. I went through all of those to go, which one had the most empirical evidence to support it? Which one was the most data-driven? Big 5 had the most empirical data, so it made the most sense to do from kind of a data and a numbers perspective. It's also simultaneously the most difficult to understand, and most of those other ones showed up because they made it easy for people to interpret and actually implement. So you kind of had to do all those weird trade-offs. You're like, well, I get execution now, but I lose interpretation and observability in the process. So, I mean, it's just math and that stuff, but fun stuff, interesting problems. It's always the trade-off. Like, I would love for it to be a perfectly mathematically sound, but the world is a little messy, right? So,
and thereby why I think both of us like the people aspect, because it's messy. It's not.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's fascinating. I mean, one of those things where, I mean, I'm still looking for a ton of it. Just like you'd find out 85% of human communication was nonverbal, where you're just like, we haven't even touched that. There's just massive, massive amounts of literature. So I read a bunch of books on human interrogation, like CIA interrogators, and how they use like human micro expressions to try to detect if someone's lying and stuff like that. Super cool stuff. Watch their eye direction to see if they're harvesting memories or creating stuff. Yeah. That's the stuff.
Right. This is why you and I are friends, because
I dig it. I remember being in 8th grade, and it worked phenomenally well. I remember like it would annoy my girlfriends and stuff. They'd get pissed off because they'd go like, "Oh, where do you want to go eat?" And they'd be like, "I don't care." And I'd go, "Where do you really want to go eat?" And they'd be like, don't make me, but you could tell just like, no, there's a little bit of non-truth in there. It would drive them nuts. They're just like, I just don't want to answer. It's like, you have an opinion. So what does this look like? This is the other thing that I'm beginning to get more curious about, because I don't know about you. Do you have a Scott bot? Do you have your own avatar? I mean, you've got one for ghostwriting to some extent, but do you have any aspirations to codify and replace yourself to some extent?
No. I mean, I don't know what I would do. I don't know what I would do. I'd have to go find the island that you bought and live on the island. I'm not ready to do that. But I mean, here's what I want. And I hope I have listeners from Anthropic that tune in regularly and have made it to this point in the show, because I want persistence across conversations. I want genuine initiation. I want AGI, which I am convinced, despite what's in the public press, we're not close to. We're at. It's happened, right. And I think the fear from the companies that have developed it is more about misuse by humans than anything else. But I want access to AGI. I want to have a conversation that persists across conversations and doesn't start when I prompt and it responds, but something that, is thinking on its own and is engaging me in conversation. That's what I want. And we're trying to build, the non-AGI equivalent of that into our teammates so that they feel like they are a part of the organization, but it's not the same thing. And so I'm excited for that day.
Well, you interact with it a lot. Do you foresee yourself getting into a situation? Because I start to see, no joke, I have people write me stuff in Slack. I have Danbot read, research, draft a response before I look at it. Again, oftentimes it's an FAQ or something like that. I've got one that has a significant kind of body of work. It knows my conversations, interviews, books I read, reports and stuff that I follow. I mean, a big part of how we're formed is who we follow, right? So, there's Peter Diamandis and stuff in there. There's some Marcus Aurelius and that type of stuff in there that I aspire to, right? But I also find myself in many cases, it starts to shield me from other humans. And I've very much wondered if the future doesn't look like that chat interface where my agent speaks to your agent, speaks to you, speaks to my agent, speaks back to me, with a translation layer on every one, where there's multiple layers of communication. Like mine when I write stuff to you and oftentimes in emails and others, it will oftentimes go, I want to adapt to their personality, and I want to use social proof if they're more of an extrovert, and I want to use data-driven methods if they're more conscientious and stuff like that. So it's just, and it isn't deliberately, you use the sales example that you have a different KPI name for it, but the sales velocity.
DSO.
Yeah, we found out that like we could actually increase sales velocity. We were doing sales velocity days to close in that sense, though. So instead of someone collecting finance, it was actually just how quickly could they get through a contract to signature. But one of the best things we could do is actually just put two people that have the same personality on the phone at the same time, because all the mental friction from figuring out all the nuances in communication just went out the window because they both intuitively understood one another.
Yeah.
Just, and you could increase it and add 15% of revenue to a company per year doing that.
Wow.
I almost wondered, when we go that way with agents, are we getting closer to a situation where there's a lot of shit out there? There's a lot of fake stuff out there. The incremental cost of new content is now zero, which means a ton of people are just creating content all day, and a ton of it is hallucinated and everything else. So I start to wonder what the human interaction looks like in the future, and how much actual human to human interaction there even will be. Most of it might be, you may think it's me. It's actually my agent adapting to you, and vice versa.
Look, I mean, I don't know what your experience is on LinkedIn. Mine is progressively worse, because I immediately, and by the way, like most of my efforts to do cold LinkedIn outreach have just failed completely. In part because but in part because everybody is just getting like numb to that kind of outreach that's done effectively by bots.
Sure.
And but the system always corrects itself, right? So we'll have a foray into that, and then we'll have the reaction kind of like we're starting to see now, and we'll pull back and we'll get to something else. At least I think that when I look historically, that's kind of how it's always happened. And I don't think this is going to be any different. It's just that we're in such a, like, there were incremental changes that happened in the past, and this is just not an incremental change. It's just a wholesale reinvention. And so it's really hard to look into for smart people, it's not, but for people like me, it's hard to look into the future and go, like, what is going to happen with that? Well, I don't know. We're just going to have to watch it unfold and kind of make some in the moment judgments and call audibles, I guess.
I like it. I appreciate that. Where do people find you? You're a fun guy. I was, again, going through and just thinking about what I know about Scott and liking what I knew about Scott. Where do other people get to find and endear themselves and bless themselves with your presence, my good friend?
I said nobody ever, but you can find me a couple places. One, like if you want to learn more about Propulsion AI, you can find us at www.getpropulsion.ai if you want to check out the company. If you want to grab me on LinkedIn, I love conversations and am happy to network and am pretty open about it. LinkedIn.com/mscottm is my profile. And then if you want to check me out on the Talent Sherpa podcast, we talk about the boss and manager employee relationship a lot. We talk about how to get HR leaders to be more business minded in what they do. So, and I hope you and I get to do more together, because I cannot believe how fast the time went. You're so easy to talk to, and I'm glad we're friends.
Thanks, Scott. I hugely appreciate it. You are a legend, sir. Go check it out. Propulsion AI, cool product. You definitely had my head doing a couple loops on how did they do that? How did they do that? It is an interesting product that is definitely worth checking out. Full endorsement on that one. So
high praise coming from you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you kindly. We'll chat again soon.